Testing, testing. Still no feedback. Excellent.
Hello? Hello, this is Commissioner O'Donnell. Am I on?
Perfect timing, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. This is a hearing of unusual size, to say the least. This hearing is called to order. The time is 9:01 a.m. I am Commission President James Brown and the presiding officer for this hearing. With me today in the Bollinger Room are Vice President Jennifer Fielder, Commissioner Andy Pinocci. Commissioner Andy Bukacek is somewhere in the building. She'll be here. And then Commissioner O'Donnell is participating online. Very pleased to have you join us here at the PSC. Attorneys Lucas Hamilton, Laura Wachowski, and Dan Palco will be advising the commission in this matter. A commission staff are also present. And then, of course, this hearing is being transcribed by a superstar with the Zofsky court reporting. Good to see you. Today's date, of course, is Tuesday, April 11, 2023. The commission and the staff are appearing from Helena, Montana. We are in the Bollinger Room. This is the scheduled public hearing in docket number 2022.07.078 involving the application of Northwestern Energy for authority to increase retail electric and natural gas utility service rates and for approval of electric and natural gas service schedules, rules, allocated costs of service, and rate design. I will now take appearances of counsel, all of you, and who you represent. We'll start with the applicant, Northwestern Energy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Shannon Heim.
Good morning, Sarah Norcott. Also enter the appearance of Ann Hill, Clark Hensley, and Mitch Warbell. Thank you.
And a Consumer Counsel.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Please enter the appearance of Jason Brown, on behalf of the Montana Consumer Council.
Large customer group.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. Thor Nelson of the law firm Holland and Hart, appearing today on behalf of the Montana Large Customer Group.
Is Mr. Stoffel going to join you?
Nope, it'll be just me.
All right. For Walmart. Very good. Is Ms. Clark joining you? All right, thank you. Federal executive agencies.
Good morning, Mr. President, Chairman. It's Captain Marcus Duffy from the Department of Air Force representing Federal Executive Agency, and then also my co-counsel.
Mr. Ed Lucas from Elmstrom Air Force Base.
Good morning, gentlemen. Montana Environmental Information Center.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. This is Sean Helly for MEIC. I'm joined by Jenny Harbine and Malcolm Gilbert.
Good morning. Human Resource Council District, Natural Resources Defense Council.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Chuck McGraw, that's MAGRAW, representing Human Resource Council District 11, Natural Resources Defense Council, and Northwest Energy Coalition. And I'm joined by co-counsel Diego Rivas, RIVAS.
Thank you. Good morning. 350 Montana.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Monica Tranel, TRANEL, on behalf of 350 Montana. Thank you.
Good morning. Renewable Northwest.
Good morning, Mr. President and Commissioners. Melissa Hornbein on behalf of Renewable Northwest, accompanied by Barbara Chilcott.
Thank you and good morning. Broad Reach Power.
Is this on? No. Thank you, Mr. President. Mike Uda on behalf of Broadridge Power. I'm here with my partner, Anna Cashcase.
Good morning. All right, did I miss any legal counsel this morning? All right, some housekeeping matters. Recesses will occur at convenient times during the hearing. I will note that we only have one bathroom, men's and women's, here at the commission. That's not an ideal situation. We have multiple witnesses and attorneys appearing in person, therefore be mindful of the traffic jam that's going to occur during the hearing breaks in this matter. Try to plan around those traffic jam times. In addition, of course, there are multiple parties in this proceeding and multiple witnesses, as well as this is a matter of significant public interest, to say the least. So in the words of the late, great Jerry Reed, we have a long way to go and a short time to get there. So I would ask each of the counsel and witnesses to be brief, direct, and to the point, as we have a lot of participation in this case and we want to get to everybody. All parties are on notice that the hearing will be concluded within the time frame set forth in the scheduling order. We're not going over time on this hearing. We have set aside a significant amount of time to get this proceeding done. We're going to stick to it. I also expect counsel to treat each other as well as the commission with respect and follow the dictates and rules of professional conduct, namely rules 3.5 and 3.6. I expect each of you knows what those rules are. All right, we have reached the point in time for our public comment. Montana Public Service welcomes public comment on this matter of significant public interest. In order to ensure that we get to witnesses who have traveled from near and far, be here today in person, we will need to impose time limits on public comment. So we are going to start with an hour of public comment this morning. In order to accommodate public comment, we will open each morning of the hearing with public comment time. Thus, if you are unable to publicly comment today, there will be opportunity to do so throughout the course of this hearing. We will certainly accommodate everybody's wish to provide public comment on this matter. However, we are going to have to limit public comment to 3 minutes each time to speak. Again, if you'd like to echo remarks of a commenter who has gone before, I encourage you to state your name, indicate that you joined the prior commenter, and allow the next commenter to proceed. After an hour, we will, if you are in person today, we will certainly allow you to state your name, indicate your position in this matter briefly so that you don't have to travel back to the commission. Anybody listening online, you can also have the option of submitting public comments online at the commission's EDI website or by email to pschelp@mt.gov. Again, that's pschelp@mt.gov. All right. So the way that we're going to do public comment is we're going to start with in-person public comment, and we're going to do it in the order that persons signed up to do it. Which will be the yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. President. Northwestern would like to lodge a standing objection to any public commenter who is an employee or a member of an intervening party or Northwestern.
Or a member of?
Mm-hmm. So an employee or a management figure in an intervening party.
Thank you for limiting that. There is going to be, I would say, members of various interested parties today commenting. All right, that's noted. We'll deal with those if they arise. Commenter number one, Nicholas Fitzmaurice. Please come to the podium right here. Thank you. Please state and spell your name for the record and where you're from.
Hello. My name is Nicholas Fitzmaurice, spelled NicholasFitzmaurice, and I'm from Bozeman. Good morning, commissioners and everyone in the room, and thank you for having me. As a rate-paying customer of Northwestern Energy, I've been following this case since the initial filing in August. And in this hearing, I urge the Public Service Commission to decline the proposed rate increases. This May, I'll be graduating from Montana State University with an engineering degree. At MSU, I've worked closely with campus engineers who maintain our reliable energy access on campus. And I worked in energy policy modeling this past summer in Washington, D.C. At the end of the day, I'm only a student, but as a ratepayer bearing the brunt of Northwestern's exploitative practices, I've exercised due diligence in reviewing this case, but it's not my job to investigate Northwestern's generation practices. Providing reliable energy to Montanans is a deeply nuanced undertaking, so I do not protest Northwestern's practices lightly. However, the utility has proven time and time again their interests lay solely in profit maximization, fabricating baseless claims around threatened reliability to justify expensive investments into excessive coal and natural gas infrastructure. Instead of investing in energy that will be economically viable for the long term, Northwestern is building the most expensive possible generation infrastructure to make greater marginal returns at the expense of ratepayers. While the rest of the United States moves away from coal-powered electricity generation, Northwestern recently announced a deal to increase ownership in the deteriorating coal strip generation plant. What's more, the utility is already bullheadedly investing over $250 million into the as yet unapproved Yellowstone County generation station. Northwestern claims the need for retroactive cost recovery, but they continue demonstrating financial negligence that will have them pushing for even higher rates in the near future. Northwestern has other viable options for their generation portfolio, which they're desperately trying to discredit to regulatory bodies such as you, the Public Service Commission, in order to protect their absurd profit margins. For example, in 2019, the Montana State Legislature passed House Bill 467, allowing utilities to refinance stranded generation assets, such as the increasingly expensive coal strip plant, through ratepayer-backed securitized bonds. This empowers utilities to accelerate asset depreciation timelines while remaining financially solvent to reinvest and continue providing reliable electricity to Montanans. Additionally, tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act make alternative energy sources more economically competitive than ever, and Montana already has abundant untapped wind energy potential. However, Northwestern refuses to account for these factors in their economic modeling, investing with no mind for the future. As our elected public service commissioners, you've been charged to ensure that ratepayers have continued access to utility services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term. This rate increase is not affordable for Montanans, nor is it necessary for providing reliable energy in the state. I speak for my peers in saying that we are already feeling the burden of the interim 12.6% electricity rate increase from October, and we are dreading the prospect of the full 25% increase. Voicing concerns of the MSU students, the Associated Students of Montana State University unanimously passed a resolution in February expressing opposition to Northwestern's proposed rate increase. Then the Montana Associated Students passed a similar resolution in March, representing the over 40,000 students attending public universities across the state. Your constituents are displeased and will not respond well to unnecessary rate increases when your seats are up for re-election. I made the decision to forego my other commitments this week to observe these proceedings in hopes that my presence might carry the weight of so many disgruntled ratepayers across the state who cannot afford to do the same. Commissioners, as you begin your hearing proceedings, I urge you to decline Northwestern Energy's proposed rate increases. Thank you for your time and for your service to the people of Montana.
Thank you for your public comment this morning. All right, our next public commenter is Jenny Nielsen. Hello, Ms. Nielsen. Nice to see you in person. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from, please.
Okay, so my legal name, in case there's any cops, Jennifer Loren Nielsen, JENNIPHA Nielsen, NIELSEN. So I gave you guys my straight speech last Tuesday. You know the domino effect that's going to happen. But today I came because it's actually really important that I'm not part of a political party. I'm not part of an environmental organization. There's 6 generations of my family in Montana, from Terry to Missoula. And most of us generationally have had to leave Montana to make enough money to come back to Montana. And the median income we know is like $56,000 for the average Montanan. And most people can't afford to be here because honestly, it's 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. And what are they doing? They're getting ready for work. They're getting their kids to school. They're trying to make ends meet. And I'm very much of we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We handle it ourselves. That's why we're a very independent state. We were purple forever because we do it on our own. People can't do it on their own with this kind of increase. I've sat on boards. I've been a commissioner, not here. I respect the position you're in. But remember, at the end of the day, it's people like me. It's people like you. It's like your staff who will bear the cost of what they're proposing. And I bought a dozen eggs yesterday and it was $6. The egg mafia is going to take over. Trust me. I filled up my tank. Again, it's still higher than we would expect. I pay my power bill that has already gone up, but with all the other taxes feels much higher than the 12+% that was originally approved at the end of the day in the what to pay. So I listened to Bloomberg and they talk about how we have some of the highest inflation going on right now and the lowest unemployment since the 60s. That means everybody's working. But with the cost of things, we're still not making it. What's going to happen is organizations that do budgets annually don't have a buffer this big to prepare. The new clinic in Missoula that has an MRI machine that costs $800 versus the $2,500 that St. Pat's charges has a bill of over $30,000 a month. They may not stay in business if this is approved. The bakeries, your favorite place, your restaurants, we don't have a budget for it. And at the end of the day, I understand there's always needs. Trust me, I worked in big tech. I understand needs and I understand layoffs, but I also understand a parent saying, we just can't afford it. This is competition for Northwest Energy. This is not a free market where there's competition where, ratepayers can switch to another provider. I mean, I try and get solar panels.
30
but hey,
seconds.
I'm going to ask you to remember what it was like, as Dolly Parton said, to work 9 to 5, just trying to get by, because those are your Montanans. We get lost with all the newbies, but we're still trying to stay here. Please don't let this be the straw that broke the camel's back. And I appreciate you guys. And I'll be back later this week, maybe with brownies. Who knows?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment this morning. I'm not sure this person is in the room. She did sign up. Winona Bateman. Is Winona Bateman in the room? Okay, move on. Then the next person is also Winona Rachel. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from, please.
Hi, my name is Winona Rachel, Winona Rachel. I'm a working class Northwestern ratepayer from Missoula, and I oppose the proposed 25% increase in residential customer rates. And I also oppose the settlement that was reached on April 3rd, which will burden residential customers with the greatest portion of rate increases. As I'm sure you all know, wages for in-state working class jobs in Montana have not gone up very much in the past few years, but housing prices have skyrocketed. I currently have 3 jobs and pay over half of my monthly income in rent. And in 2022, almost 90% of my wages went towards housing. So if you add to this drastically increasing utility prices, the basic cost of living becomes even more unaffordable. I currently live in a small duplex with my housemate, and we've made it the most energy efficient we can. But this winter we paid about $200 a month, which is 25% of total monthly rent in utilities to Northwestern Energy. So I ask you today to not put the interests of big business ahead of working class ratepayers and to stand up for renters who are already struggling to make a living. We may not have the financial and political power that Northwestern does, so we urgently need the Public Service Commission to commit to standing up for our interests. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next public commenter is Patricia Ames. Is Patricia Ames in the room? Please come forward. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from.
My name is Patricia Ames, Patricia Ames, and I'm originally from Great Falls, and currently I'm living in Missoula. Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to comment. 4 generations of my family have been born and raised in Montana. And I have lived through the history of the Montana Power Company and the eventual takeover of Northwestern Energy, who is a corporate for-profit monopoly. The Public Service Commission is elected by the citizens of Montana to protect us from excessive rate charges. Of course, that's an abbreviated version of how we got to where we are today. I'm a retired advanced practice nurse. I'm also a mother and a grandmother. I live on a fixed retirement income. I'm the quintessential little old lady. This winter, my power bill has been $100 a month more than it was last year. And I actually got a new highly efficient furnace. And I meant to bring a copy of my bill to show you, and I left it at home. Last fall, you gave Northwestern Energy an interim pre-approval to charge us ratepayers 12.6% more on our power bills. That doesn't account for the $100 more I'm paying every month, and many other are paying for gas heating. According to Northwestern Energy, in a little insert that was in my bill, they said our gas bills are going up this year because gas is going up. So you have the authority to force Northwestern Energy into investing in more cost-effective renewables. It is just undisputable that coal and gas are only going to cost more and more, while renewables are already far less costly and will be much more affordable for us ratepayers. Northwestern Energy's tired old diatribe about the sun not always shining and the wind not always blowing is old and outdated. Technology has advanced and we have battery storage. Between Northwestern Energy's irrational commitment to buy and keep operating the old and deteriorating Colstrip 3 and 4, which will cost us ratepayers millions, and their aggressive pursuit of Laurel gas plant, they will effectively guarantee themselves huge profits at the expense of ratepayers. These will become stranded assets and we will be paying for it forever. I'm not an attorney and I haven't spoken to one, but I've had this thought that I wonder if at some point ratepayers can file a class action lawsuit against the Public Service Commission and Northwestern Energy if the Public Service Commission supports Northwest Energy's plan to continue to bilk us ratepayers with their economically negligent fossil fuel infrastructure. When I was in graduate school, one of my professors was the one who
15
exposed
seconds, I'm sorry.
the tobacco industry for their longtime efforts to suppress information and to try and, continue to get people addicted. I feel like this is a similar situation. And like I said, I'm just wondering, like if at some point you don't protect us ratepayers, if we'll need to file a class action lawsuit.
Thank you,
very
Ms.
much.
Ames. Thank you. All right, our next public commenter is Michael Hudson. Michael, are you in the room? Please come forward and welcome. State and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from, please.
My name is Michael Hudson, MICHAELHUDSON. I'm from Missoula. And I am here to ask the Public Service Commission to stand with Montana families and oppose this rate increase. We are struggling. My wife and I both have good paying jobs, and we are going into debt this year. We are tapping into our retirement to make ends meet. And we're the lucky ones. There are hundreds of thousands of Montanans whose families are working, who are hungry, kids who are hungry. This is not the right time for a rate increase. If it was necessary, if it was a legitimate need, so be it. We'd have to make it work. But I don't think that's what's going on. We see what's happening. We know that if you approve this rate, that we will have the highest rates in Montana, Washington, Idaho, Oregon, Wyoming, Utah. This is absurd. It doesn't need to be this way. without oversight, the system is set up for Northwestern Energy executives. The cost plus system favors them unless they have oversight. The more money that they spend on a new plant, the more money they make and the more we pay. That's why they're like kids in a candy store. They need adult supervision, and that's what I'm asking from you guys. If the Laurel gas plant was a good idea, if that's what they needed the money for, then why don't they bring the Laurel gas plant forward for a regular approval process instead of this strange, backwards, closed door system? We want you to stand, you stood up to Northwestern Energy in the past, and we want you to do it again. Please stand with Montana families and oppose this rate increase. The IRA is available. I know it's got some controversy around it, but states around us are taking advantage of it to build affordable, renewable energy. We want you to support the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. All right, our next public commenter is Jeffrey Smith. Mr. Smith, are you in the room? All right, welcome. Please come forward, state and spell your name for the record, and identify where you're from, Mr. Smith.
My name is Jeffrey Smith, Jeffrey. I live in Polson, Montana.
Mr. Smith, did you provide pre-filed testimony in this matter?
Yes.
Mr. Nell? You don't need to come forward.
I don't know if there's an objection pending or where we are, Mr.
Northwestern does object.
And simply because they object doesn't mean that you can't hear his testimony. What procedural mechanism, what rule of evidence? This is public comment. He's a member of the public. And further, just for the commission, if you don't know this, we have not and are not moving his pre-filed testimony into the record in this docket.
Any response to that?
Well, I would just point for the record that Mr. Smith is co-chair of 350 Montana, which is an intervener represented by counsel, and it's highly unusual for someone in that position to offer public comment.
Mr. Nell, I don't need to hear any more on this. I'm going to overrule that objection. Mr. Smith, you're certainly entitled to provide public comment this morning. I do note from your counsel, however, that she does not intend to call you as a live witness in this matter, and under that condition, please proceed. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President, Council and commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank you for serving the people of Montana. And I also want to ask what happened to the planning with this rate case, and where was the PSC as a regulator? This is a case with a huge historic rate hike and two very big issues. $285 million gas plant and a majority share of the coal strip plant that are not part of this rate case. So why are we here talking about 25% increase in rates? And there are two big giant developments outside of this rate case that will again increase rates in the near future. I think the PSC was established to do great things for the people of Montana. It was established to bring electricity, copper wires to places that private business didn't find enough profit in. And so the regulated monopoly did a wonderful job of serving the remote ranches and farms, towns and villages in Montana. And I think we're back to a similar situation right now. That was a win-win. It was a win for the people of Montana, and it was a win for the regulated monopoly. We're in the middle of a great transition here worldwide, a great transition from 19th century technology to 21st century, 22nd century technologies as far as the energy sector goes. And the PSC needs to have a place where it is telling the monopoly how to plan for our future, how to keep rates low, how to keep the power running reliably. Other states are doing it. Why aren't we doing it here in Montana? We need to create a new win-win situation, and you're the folks who are in charge. We need to tell the monopoly where to go and how to plan for this great transition that we're in the middle of. A lack of vision by the PSC and lack of planning with concrete steps for the monopoly seems to be heading us where the last best place is going to have the worst rates of electricity and gas rates. And we're also going to have the largest greenhouse gas pollution in the Western states. And I ask you to take charge of this situation, make your vision consistent with what we're seeing throughout the rest of the world, and force the monopoly to do what it needs to do to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. All right, our next public commenter is Jim Roach. Jim, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from, Mr. Roach.
My name is Jim Roach, and I'm from Missoula. It's JIMROACH. And I thank the commission for hearing my testimony today. I stand in opposition to the rate increase that Northwestern Energy is requesting. I feel that Northwestern is asking their customers to pay for infrastructure that uses obsolete technology and results in the most expensive energy rates in the region. People are already feeling the pinch of inflation on their household budgets. I hear every day from people that are totally pissed off with what they're currently paying for energy. This is on top of sky-high housing costs, higher food costs, higher fuel costs. Everything is up, and now Northwestern wants to charge us even more. You know, give us a break. It's not like Northwestern Energy ratepayers can shop around for energy. Only the monopoly utility can do that. And it seems to me that they are forcing the most costly choices on their captive customers. Coal energy is currently the most expensive power in the company's portfolio, yet Northwestern is actually increasing its reliance on coal by taking on a greater share of the outdated coal strip complex with its myriad environmental and technical issues. In a state with bountiful renewable energy potential, third in the nation for wind, this company wants to invest hundreds of millions of dollars on costly, climate-wrecking methane-fired generation facilities and make ratepayers foot the bill. What happens when the price of dirty fracked methane spikes or a real price is put on carbon emissions? We'll all be paying for this climate-wrecking, backwards-looking infrastructure for at least 30 years in the rates we pay and the damage it does to our way of life. Probably the most likely outcome, and perhaps the best for the planet, is that these monstrous gas plants become stranded assets. Unfortunately, Northwestern Energy customers will be paying the price, and they don't want to. Polls show Montanans are highly concerned about the accelerating climate crisis. They don't want to be complicit in all the destruction happening due to the burning of fossil fuels. But being captive customers, they have no choice. Renewables coupled with energy storage is shown to be cleaner and cheaper. Our monopoly utility needs to be a constructive partner with its customers to help address the climate crisis and bring down budget-busting high energy costs. And the PSC should do its part to move them in that direction. Should we all pay even more to go in the wrong direction because it profits Northwestern Energy stockholders and executives? No way. Say no to this gross rate increase. And I thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Roach. All right, next public commenter, Mr. Jim Parker. Jim, come forward, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and where are you from?
Yes, thank you, commissioners, for this time. My name is Jim Parker, Parker, from Missoula. First of all, I'd like to say that I oppose the current rate increase proposed by Northwestern Energy, and I oppose the proposed settlement made on April 3rd. I also support much of the testimony of people prior to me. I'm very concerned, of course, about the rates being increased before we even know what the costs for those rate increases will actually deliver. We've seen the debacle of what happened with deregulation in '97. We've seen stranded assets that ratepayers have had to cost for paid to Northwestern Energy in surplus of what their actual costs turned out to be. And we're headed down that same way again with increasing rate costs now before we know, as is your mandate, whether they're reasonable and prudent costs to the ratepayers of Montana. Now, I know you have the capacity and ability to justify these things if you do that work, and I'm asking you please to be very sure that these are reasonable and prudent costs, because it doesn't seem that they have a very good track record to make them reasonable nor prudent. I'm very concerned about the proposed settlement made behind doors that at least the public, I don't remember being invited to. And of course, I didn't find my name tag on one of these chairs for me as a public to have room in the room to make testimony. So I'm concerned that this settlement, it may be illegal. It's certainly concerning at the very most. And as we know, the bottom line is, the summary is residential rates increase more than any other electric customer class, including industrial, commercial. And according to the settlement, then rates will increase even more once Northwestern Energy requests approval to charge customers for the cost for the new gas plant. So these are all things that fall under the rubric of good planning that you heard another speaker talk about. Every other utility in America is moving away from coal. By the time 2026 comes along and Northwestern Energy, if allowed, buys more coal strip, they will be the only utility adding coal to their portfolio. What is it that they know that the rest of the world does not? I'm afraid they know that they can increase profits for their executives and their stockholders. And it goes against our own Constitution for a clean and healthy environment not to include and cost out the externalities of increasing gas, increasing coal in a time of climate chaos, which we all know is a science and proven fact, and there's no consideration for those externalities. So I asked the commission to redouble your efforts to be sure that they're prudent and wise and reasonable, that these costs aren't stranded on the ratepayers while giving the industrial folks a pass. Please stand up for the ratepayers. It's your job. We appreciate you doing your job, and we will continue to be here to help you advance your job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Our next public commenter is Chris Hafer. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from.
Hi, my name is Chris Hafer, Chris Hafer. I live in Butte. I'm speaking as a proponent for Northwestern Energy. I have lived my entire life in Montana. I have worked for myself for the past 30 years. My partner, Chris Hampton, and I have started an asphalt paving and excavating business in Butte in the early 90s. For the past,
Mr. President, I'm having trouble hearing this testimony.
All right, thank
Could
you.
you ask him to come closer to the microphone?
For the past 15 years.
Thank you.
Sorry. My partner, Chris Hansen, and I started an asphalt paving and excavating business in Butte in the early 90s. For the past 15 years, we have done work for Northwestern Energy, performing paving, excavating, and concrete work for Northwestern Energy throughout Western Montana. I also own S&N Concrete in Anaconda, Montana. We produce ready-mix concrete and supply Northwestern Energy with aggregates on a regular basis. The majority of our work has been working with and supporting Northwestern Energy on the distribution systems improvement project in Butte. Northwestern has been busy replacing gas pipes, meters, electrical lines, and poles throughout the service area. Northwestern Energy has played a key role in the success and growth of our business. This work has helped our business to acquire more machinery and real estate, which has helped support our local tax base. We have been able to hire employees and keep these hardworking Montanans employed. All of our employees receive competitive wages, health insurance, and retirement benefits. The work that has been done on the gas and electrical infrastructure was much needed, as it has been in place for many decades. The safety and efficiency benefit has been huge for all of the Montana ratepayers. The utility infrastructure on the Butte Hill was some of the oldest in the state. The improvements have been met with positive response from the community. We can all agree that having a reliable utility is paramount in order to keep our town safe and desirable places to live and raise our families. I've always found Northwestern Energy to run a tight ship. They hold us accountable for our work and see to it that we are working efficiently and safely. We work with Northwestern Energy to always do things in the most cost-effective manner to keep bills reasonable for the ratepayers of Montana. The impact that Northwestern Energy has on the community that H&H Contracting works in is unparalleled. They employ hundreds of people and dozens of local businesses rely on them. Northwestern Energy is at the front of the pack when it comes to being a good corporate community partner. Their attention to local schools,
15 seconds,
and all public activities is unmatched. Keeping Northwestern Energy financially sound, in my opinion, is a no-brainer. The job creation and trickle-down business growth will continue to pay all of Montana back in a big way. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hafer. All right, our next public commenter is Larry Wilbanks. Larry, are you in the room? Please come forward. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President, Commission, for being here. My name is Larry Wilbanks. I'm
the microphone closer to you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Larry Wilbanks. I'm from Billings, Montana. I am here in support of Northwestern's energy rate case today. Montana puts a tremendous amount of responsibility on Northwestern to provide the people and businesses in Montana with reliable power while upgrading their technology, adapting to renewable energies, and fire hardening their infrastructure. It is not a secret that throughout the Western United States, including here in Montana, utility companies are faced with the challenge of changing out a large portion of their infrastructure as it nears the end of its life cycle. All during this time, the cost of nearly every product has risen. Northwestern Energy has absorbed the cost of the rising cost of labor, equipment, and material, while simultaneously investing in their infrastructure year after year to support the communities of Montana. And I'll end it with this. Voting to support Northwest Energy's energy rate case is not merely a decision to allow Northwest Energy to increase rates. We should all see it as an opportunity for Montana and for Northwestern to continue to invest in the electrical infrastructure that all Montanans can rely on while delivering that energy through our mountains and communities day after day with a high level of confidence that Northwest Energy is doing what's best for Montana.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. All right, our next public commenter is Kyle Hintz. Kyle, welcome. Please come forward, state and spell your name for the record, and identify where you're from.
Good morning, Kyle Hintz, KYLEHINTZ. I'm the Assistant Business Manager of Local 44 IBEW. I'm here to support Northwest Energy in this rate case. We have 400 members or their employees that spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keeping this power reliable and gas reliable. We support clean, safe, and cost-effective utilities. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your public comment this morning. The next public commenter is Mary Dixon. Mary, are you in the room? Please come forward and welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and where you're from.
My name's Mary Dixon.
Marydickson. And I want to thank you, commissioners, for hearing my words today. I'm from Missoula. I've traveled here today to voice my opposition to Northwest Energy's plan to continue to rely on expensive fossil fuel to power our state. You have heard and hopefully listened to the science behind the many dangers this continued reliance on fossil fuel poses for the future of Montana, and more importantly, our planet. The costs are enormous. You've also heard statistics on the lowering cost and efficiency of renewable clean energy. Wind and solar are resources that are richly available in Montana, and we are fortunate for that. So I am here to raise my voice in opposition to this plan on more levels than I can mention. Here are the 4 that brought me here today. They are by nature interwoven. First, I have lived in Montana my entire life of 64 years, and I treasure this place. It is a gift to live here. I want to do what I can to keep it a healthy place to live. Second, I am a mom, and I want a good life for my children who are both working hard to leave this earth better than they have found it, as we all should. Third, I am a nurse for 42 years. I've cared for very vulnerable babies in newborn intensive care most of that time. I'm still a nurse, and I worry about children and families that are not or will not have a voice in this conversation. Children that are extremely high risk for serious health issues that are directly related to the air that we breathe. And fourth, my faith compels me to speak out for justice and care of creation and this earth that we are blessed each day to live on. So I urge you to listen to what is said here today, to take it to heart, and to form a plan that actually has a vision for a healthy and sustainable future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Our next public commenter is Daniel Berry. Mr. Berry, are you in the room? Daniel Berry? All right. Are there any persons in the room who would like to give public comment this morning? Please step forward. Welcome. Please identify yourself, state and spell your name for the record and where you're from.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and commissioners. My name is Jan Hoem, H-O-E-M, and I'm speaking for the 70s plus crowd.
Oh, hold on one second, ma'am. Mr. Berry, just go ahead and just stay in the room if you would. I'm sorry, ma'am. Go ahead.
That's all right. So during the 2020 and 2022 campaigns, political campaigns, I was telephoning, and I asked them to give me a list of people to call who were over 70 and of any party. I loved doing that. I spoke with many people and they told me their stories. Too often, they told me that they were living on a fixed income that was too low for them to easily make decisions about heat, light, food, medicine, and other things. I've read that Northwestern Energy has a way of helping people who are financially stressed, but I don't think any of these people had found it, their proposal, or knew anything about it. If it was online, they probably didn't know how to read it or find it because most of these people were in their 80s and 90s. I had more I wanted to say, but I want other people to have a chance. I will end with the fact that I am haunted by the words of a 92-year-old Hamilton woman who said, "I didn't expect to be so desperate and so alone." Thank you.
Thank you for your comment this morning. Mr. Berry, this would be the time for you to come forward now. welcome. State and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from.
My name is Daniel Barry from here in Helena. I own Great Divide Cyclery in the garage downtown. We're celebrating our 40th year this year. I'll keep this short and sweet. We operate as a seasonal business. We sell bikes, so you can't really ride bikes. Some people do. We do most of our business between April and September. When the pandemic started in early spring, I was terrified. We spent most of our savings on employees and daily operations just through the winter. So we were starting off pretty thin that spring. Thankfully, we were considered essential and we were able to keep our doors open. The sales were not normal, just considering people were scared of the pandemic. Thankfully, Northwestern Energy stepped up and created a program to help small businesses in our community and offset some of the costs of the energy, which helped us out tremendously. And I was able to keep all my employees. I truly want to say thank you to Northwestern Energy for stepping up. I do feel if the rates do go up for the much needed supply to operate our business, I just hope that technology will follow and make things for our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barry. Are there any other persons who would like to publicly comment this morning that are in the room or the overflow room? Yes, please step forward. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Brad Stacy, BRAD STACEY, and I'm from Plains, Montana. And I would just like to speak to the global warming end of it, to be putting money in both coal and gas right now. Just makes no sense. I can't see that they wouldn't be stranded in assets soon. Because laws are going to have to change as we see more of the damage that global warming does. And it's been shown that the renewables are cheaper and battery technology is getting better quick. And I would encourage them to go that route rather than the expensive to both the ratepayers and the earth of sticking with fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stacy. Any other public commenters in the room? Please step forward. Welcome. State and spell your name for the record and where you're from.
My name is Beth Taylor Wilson, BETH TAYLOR WILSON. I'm from Missoula. And I just want to echo what Brad said. In any of the publications that Northwestern has proposed for their rate increase, you have not heard the term climate change. And basically, how anybody in the state of Montana can ignore Fromberg or Gardner or Denton, Montana, and pretend that we are not going to have to face this problem. For years, we were told that fossil fuels were not the cause, just as the tobacco companies did with nicotine and smoking. There's a good book, Merchants of Doubt, that you should all read about how this happened to the public. I worry about my grandchildren and a livable future. And if we continue to pursue fossil fuels as our source for renewables, our children and our grandchildren are going to have a legacy from us of sorrow and shame. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Any other public commenters in the room or in the overflow room? Any other public commenters? Going once, going twice. All right, thank you for your public comment this morning. We will now turn to online commenters. Mr. Richard Liebert, Great Falls, are you on, Liebert? All right, we're getting a no sign from Mr. Liebert. Are there any other public commenters online? Please raise your hand if you'd like to publicly comment online on this matter. All right, seeing none. All right, well, that concludes the public comment portion of our hearing today. Thank you for all those that came from far and near to provide public comment. We appreciate that. I would just remind everybody that we will set aside a portion of time each morning of the hearing to allow for public comment, given the high interest in this matter. All right. Before we get to the evidentiary portion of our hearing, are there any informal questions from parties or their counsel at this time? All right, seeing none. Let's move to the evidentiary portion of our. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Nell, I didn't see you back
I
there.
wasn't fast enough to the microphone. I'm sorry, President Brown. I just was wondering, are we following the witness order that was sent around from Northwestern? Is that the basic outline that we're following right now?
Well, I suppose we can address that at this point in time, and I was going to address it during the evidentiary portion. But
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I was just wondering and wanted to make a request that 350 would be allowed to do an opening before the presentation of the settlement if the hearing witness order and examination is what we're going off of. Thank you.
Yes, we had contemplated that, Mr. Nell. Thank you. Okay. Now let's move into the evidentiary portion of this hearing. Let's tackle a few items. First, I understand we have several requests to allow witnesses to testify remotely via Zoom. I understand that these requests are largely unopposed, but Ms. Trinnell, I understand that you may have an objection to remote testimony from the witnesses supporting the settlement agreement. Would you like to speak to that objection, Ms. Trinnell?
Mr. President, it was our request would be that, and I understand that the Consumer Council does have their witness who's supporting the settlement agreement will be in person. And that was the main request that we had, that we would be able to cross-examine the Consumer Council's witness live.
Mr. Brown, do you want to confirm then?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I can confirm that we'll have a witness here, I believe later today, who can testify live.
All right. Does that resolve your objection, Mr. Trinnell? All right. Thank you. Obviously, given the complexity of this hearing and the length of time that we've allocated for it and the need to be concise in how we hold this hearing, I am certainly inclined to allow any witness who wants to participate remotely to do so. Are there any other parties that want to be heard on witnesses hearing remotely? If not, that appears to be unopposed. So all requests that were made prior to the hearing for remote appearances are hereby granted. Thank you, counsel, for your work together on that. Okay, there have been a number of requests for accommodations to allow witnesses to appear on certain dates of this hearing. It's my understanding that there have been no objections to these requests. However, depending on the pace of the hearing, we may be ready to hear from witnesses before they are available to appear in person. So again, we may have some witnesses appearing remotely. Again, I will accommodate those requests. However, I would ask, because of the number of counsel that are involved in this case, that you work with each other and with the commission to try to accommodate the needs of witnesses when they do need to appear when they are remotely. Done remotely, it's a bit of a complex matter right now for the commission to track what's going on, so we do need your help. Okay, let's move on to Northwestern Energy's objections to the admission of evidence identified in the pre-hearing memos of 350 Montana and Broad Reach. Ms. Norcott, are you going to speak to the objections?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, go ahead.
Northwestern objects to the mission of the following documents that were identified in our pre-hearing memorandum regarding documents identified by 350 Montana and Broad Reach. The three documents are exhibits that are not attached to pre-filed testimonies or sponsored by a witness for 350 Montana. The second is entire deposition transcripts, irrespective of the proceeding in which they were taken. And finally, exhibit BKM-9 attached to the pre-filed intervener testimony of Brandon K. Mock in docket number 2021.12.134. Because 350 Montana did not clearly articulate what exhibits and deposition transcripts it intends to move, and Northwestern's objections are on the grounds that they failed to lay a proper foundation or show that they're relevant, I would suggest that the commission wait to rule on these one at a time when they are moved into the record. And that would be the most efficient way in which to handle those, if that would be amenable to the chairman.
All right, any other matters there?
Yes, speaking to Broadreach's motion to take administrative notice, I do think that is ripe for decision at this point. The commission is permitted to take notice of judicially cognizable facts pursuant to Montana Code Annotated 2-4-612 subpart 6. This extends only though to facts that are undisputed, and that's under Montana Rule of Evidence 201B. The purpose of this mechanism is to save time and expense from requiring formal proof of undisputed facts. And you can see the Montana Supreme Court decision of Hart v. J.J. Newberry Company, 178 Mont 355 from 1978. As an example, the commission could take judicial notice of the fact that daylight savings time starts in March of each year to save parties time from producing evidence to support that fact. Broadreach has asked the commission to take administrative notice of an exhibit that is attached to testimony of a witness in a different docket on a different matter who is not a witness in this case. Judicial notice is not the proper evidentiary tool in which the parties can get evidence from another case into the record of this case. While Northwestern does not dispute that there are other evidentiary tools that would allow Broadreach to potentially use this exhibit, administrative notice is not a proper tool. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, Northwestern objects to the commission taking administrative notice of exhibit BKM-9 attached to the pre-filed intervener testimony of Brandon K. Mock in docket 2021-12-134.
All right, Ms. Trinnell, you'd like to speak to this objection? I'm sorry.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Mr.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
great. A couple of things. Let's keep in mind what actually happened here. In their testimony, they referenced Mr. Mock's exhibit from a Caithness docket. Didn't produce the whole thing. Just said, this is the cost of capacity at this rate. There is a whole bunch of other information in exhibit BKM-9. Okay. So according to Northwestern, what they would like us to do is to put their witness on the stand and ask them about an exhibit they did not prepare. At which point, my suspicion is there would be an objection on that ground. We're not objecting to them including BKM-9 in this docket. What we're objecting to is their selective use of that information. There is a lot of other information in BKM-9, and we think in fairness to the parties, all of that information should be part of the record instead of the narrow slice of it that Northwestern wants to introduce. Just as you cannot use privilege as both a sword and a shield, you should not be allowed to use the introduction of evidence to limit it to just the narrow slice that you wish others to see. And this is an extremely important point because they have been doing this a lot. And I think this is the third or fourth case in a row that this has arisen. And what I'm saying to you is we should not have to use our scarce resources and our time to show you that there is another part of this document and go through the problem of admitting it as an evidentiary matter. The far simpler thing to do is to admit what is a fact, that this is an entire document that does not contain just one number. So if we're talking about judicially cognizable facts, the example that Ms. Norcott used was daylight savings time, really? No one's gonna use administrative notice or judicial notice to talk about daylight savings time. What we want included in the record is the entirety of Exhibit BKM 9, because number one, it does fall under the heading of administrative notice. It does exist in the commission's files. It's not subject to reasonable dispute. So with that in mind, I think the objection is not well taken.
Right. Well, before we get to the, I'll rule on this one before we get to the deposition transcript. So I'm going to sustain the objection at this point in time, but Mr. Uda, you are certainly welcome to use that document if you lay proper foundation on cross-examination. All right, Mr. Nell, on the deposition transcripts.
It sounded to me as if Northwestern is reserving until we get to that bridge. So I would just ask that we cross that bridge when we get there.
All right, sounds good. All right, let's address the admission of data responses. Parties have obviously filed pre-hearing memos identifying responses they propose to admit into evidence. HRC, NRDC, since your pre-hearing memos contain the broadest request for admission of data requests, would you like to make the motion? Mr. McGraw?
Yes, Mr. President. I am not. So let's go back a little bit. It used to be, and when I say used, I mean some number of years ago, for the commission as a matter of practice to admit all data requests that were and responses that were received in the course of the proceeding. I continue to think that that is the best practice in order for the commission to have the most complete record that it can in order to make a decision. In recent years, the commission has changed its practice somewhat, requiring more specificity and individuality in the pre-hearing memos of the parties, identifying specific data requests that they wished to be included in the record. Our pre-hearing memo stated what I just articulated, namely that we think it is a better practice for the commission to introduce all data requests. So that would be a motion. Barring that, the commission can do whatever it chooses.
Thank you for the motion and for the history lesson. Are there any objections to moving all?
No objection.
Speak up now or forever hold your peace. All right, seeing none, we will admit all the data requests. All right, let's move to 350 Montana's motion for summary judgment. I would note that 350 Montana has filed a reply brief on this motion. Just gonna. Yes, of course. Before you start, does anybody objection to the admission of the reply brief? Okay. Okay. So I find the reply brief will aid the commission in its deliberations on your summary judgment motion. So we can take it into consideration as part of the summary judgment briefing.
Thank you, President Brown.
So we have set aside time for oral argument on this motion. Just know we will allow 15 minutes for 350 Montana and 15 minutes for Northwestern to argue their respective positions. Ms. Trinelli, of course, you may reserve as much of your 15 minutes as you would like for rebuttal. And with that said, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. President Brown, I would like to reserve 3 minutes.
So ordered.
Thank you. With respect to the motion for summary judgment, we are asking that the commission enter an order as a matter of law that the rider mechanism that Northwestern is attempting to use in this docket be decided and adjudicated by the commission as a matter of law to be a mechanism that is not allowed in Montana to introduce the gas plant as a resource that we all pay for. Our argument for this is contested by Northwestern largely on the grounds that it has become moot by virtue of the settlement. However, the settlement is not a settlement. It is a few parties who got together and agreed that Walmart, Phillips 66, Exxon, and the federal government wouldn't pay anything in this rate increase, and the residential ratepayers of Montana would bear a rate increase of about 18%. That's not a settlement. A settlement isn't when Northwestern think about what could lie ahead. They can get a proxy entity, Citizens for a Better Power, have that entity appear in rate cases, settle with it, and then the rest of us go home. That's not how it works. We do not have a settlement. We have active intervening parties who have participated for 9 months to a great extent, and the issues between us are not settled. So for the commission's purposes in reserving what lies ahead and how they decide this, there is no settlement as to all of the issues and all of the parties. The settlement itself is illegal, discriminatory, and deprives all of us of due process. So we are asking that the commission enter a decision on the riders as a legal vehicle. Northwestern is seeking to have us pay for the gas plant. There are traditionally, Northwestern can build whatever it wants. And for over 100 years, that's exactly what Montana Power did. All of our hydros, all of Colstrip, was all built under traditional rate recovery. So the utility decides what's best, plans, prepares, comes to the commission and says, we acquired these resources. Can we have the ratepayers pay for them? And you decide. That's not what they've done here. They decided to build this plant, assuming you would approve it, making that assumption. So they filed a pre-approval docket, and that statute was declared unconstitutional. A few months later, they said, oh gosh, what are we going to do to make the commission, to force the commission to approve the entirety of the cost of this plant that they decided to build? So they came up with the riders. And we asked for the emails about how that decision was made, and we weren't allowed to get them. So they came up with this rider as, oh, this is a great vehicle to make the citizens of Montana pay for our decisions, good or bad. No review. And then they entered the settlement last week with a few of the big customers and said, oh, we're not going to do the riders in this docket. We've decided to make the citizens of Montana pay for the gas plant through the PCAM. Yay, us. Clever idea. Only the PCAM is not designed for that. It's a cost tracker. The settlement's illegal because by statute, the PCAM is not the vehicle for this gas plant to be paid for. So where are we? We're in a position where this utility is asking this commission to force the citizens of Montana to pay for the cost of the gas plant. We are asking you to say the riders are not a legal mechanism for Montanans to do that. That issue is live. We've briefed it, and we would ask that you enter a decision on the merits of this, of the riders, that they are not a legal vehicle that should be allowed to recover the costs of this plant. And it's not just in this case. This is a legal vehicle that is unsustainable, and as a matter of law, given the undisputed facts, as Northwestern has agreed to them in their opposition brief, that as a matter of law, the riders should be declared And we're asking for a decision from this commission on that legal issue. And I'll reserve, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Norcart, would you like to proceed with argument?
I would, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I will note I will be responding to 350 Montana's motion for summary judgment. I understand that they also filed an objection to the settlement, and other counsel, I think Mr. Nelson will speak to that objection separately at a different time. So just so everyone is clear, I will be speaking to the motion for summary judgment. And I will be brief because I do believe that Northwestern's written response on this matter sufficiently covers and responds to 350's motion. The commission should deny this motion. Summary judgment is an extreme remedy that is only warranted if the moving party shows that there are no disputed facts and it is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. 350 Montana has failed to make these requisite showings. It continues instead to repeat conclusory and colorful rhetoric about what Northwestern is proposing in this case and attacking Northwestern and now several of the settling parties. For example, if you review the reply brief filed by 350 Montana on April 5th, you will note that not once does 350 Montana cite to an authoritative document for Northwestern's alleged concession of disputed facts, and it continues to cite to cases that are not binding and, more importantly, do not hold as 350 Montana alleges. In contrast, I would direct you to Northwestern's response pages 5 through 13, where Northwestern has meticulously walked through each of the alleged disputed or undisputed facts and shown where they are in fact disputed and pointed to evidence supporting that dispute. Since there remains disputed facts, the commission cannot grant summary judgment. Instead, it must take evidence and decide the matters based on the evidence. 350 Montana is also not entitled to judgment as a matter of law. Northwestern's response brief that was filed on April 3rd walks through each of the 4 arguments raised by 350 Montana. This morning, I just want to make 2 brief points regarding 2 of those arguments. First, regarding the argument that the riders are an invalid rulemaking. In 350's reply filed on April 5th, it has now shifted that argument after Northwestern correctly pointed out that the riders only apply to Northwestern and thus are not rules under the Montana Administrative Procedure Act or MAPA because they will not apply to any other public utility. In response, 350 Montana now makes the argument that if the commission approves the riders, in this case for Northwestern, it will send a flood of other public utilities before this commission to ask for similar riders, and thus a rulemaking is required. This argument from 350 Montana fails to recognize that this commission has already granted similar regulatory mechanisms in contested cases, and I would refer you to Northwestern's response on pages 17 and 20. It also cites to no legal authority for its argument that if adopting a mechanism in a contested case for one utility, it becomes a de facto rulemaking that must follow MAPA because now all utilities will ask for it. This argument is nonsensical and legally unsupported. The second point is on the issue of whether or not the riders are illegal single issue rate making. 350 Montana's reply continues to cite to the same decisions from other jurisdictions in support of this argument. And I would direct you to footnote 6 in Northwestern's response, where we walk through each of those decisions and show how those decisions do not hold, as 350 alleges. 350 does not respond to these points in its April 5th reply. It also does not respond to the other decisions from this commission that Northwestern cited in its response, where the commission granted regulatory mechanisms similar to what was being asked here, notwithstanding the fact that it may be single issue rate making. Finally, 350 makes the claim in its April 5th reply that Northwestern's agreement to pull the riders in the settlement agreement is a concession or evidence that those riders are legally unsupported. This statement misconstrues a settlement. A settlement is not a concession, it's a compromise. The commission should not view the settlement as Northwestern believing the riders are legally unsupported. In summary, 350 has failed to meet its burden to show that there are no disputed material facts in this matter, and that it is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. And with that, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I would urge you to deny this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Based on Northwestern's response argument, it appears that we've crossed the Rubicon on the mootness argument. And so we would ask that the commission address and rule on our request that the riders be adjudicated as an illegal mechanism to get anything into rates for Montana consumers. Traditional rate review is and has always been an option. It's a good way for a utility to bring a resource to the commission. It gives the commission an opportunity to review it, look at it, examine it, stress test it, and decide, was this a good investment or not? We're asking that the traditional route be the one used for the gas plant in this docket. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Nell. All right, thank you to both parties for your excellent argument. The commission will take the motion for summary judgment under advisement and issue a ruling at a later date. All right, so the objection to the settlement agreement, if you will, was raised at this time. What I would like to do on that, however, is to reserve any discussion or argument on that until we have the presentation and that document, if you will, if council are amenable to that. Very good. Are there any other formal pre-hearing matters? Requests for accommodation? I know, Ms. Trinnell, you had asked that Mr. Running try to be accommodated this afternoon or tomorrow. Do you want to address that? Okay. Okay, very good. Any other requests for accommodation? Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. President. Oh, Don. FEA requests that our local counsel, Mr. Lucas, be excused. I am admitted pro hoc vice. He's needed back at Malmstrom Air Force Base to support his job and the mission there. I've served as first counsel on this entire case. That's my motion.
All right, let me confer with counsel on this one, please. All right, confirming that we did grant the pro hoc. Mr. Lucas, you are excused. Thank you for coming this morning. Any additional matters?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have one related to witness excusal.
Sure, go ahead.
As was noted in Northwestern's pre-hearing memo, Northwestern had requested that the following individuals who answered discovery but did not file pre-filed testimony be excused from testifying. We had reached out to the parties and no party had indicated a desire to question those individuals, so that we would ask the following individuals be excused from the hearing, Luke Hamilton. Sorry, no, not Luke. I was looking at Luke.
That request is granted.
Start over. Luke Hansen, Todd Gouldseth, Carrie Harris, Michael Barnes, and Jason Merkel.
That was the highlight of the day. Is there any objection to excusing those witnesses? Seeing none, those witnesses are excused.
Thank you.
Any other witness-related matters? All right. Time is now 10:24 a.m. Before we go into the opening statements of parties, why don't we take a 10-minute break? Why don't we come back on the record at 10:35? So that gives us 11 minutes. We will go off the record.
There you go. Well, turn to the side that was work on. What we're talking about, like you said, it probably doesn't. But it sounds like some people are gonna do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, yeah. Seriously? Wow. Oh. It's sure it's like until we goes on.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Just curious how people. Think. So assuming he testified about it.
Yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, he said, I feel like I need that for us. to send that. But what the- Running quite vividly so far. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for being here and. Being advice through the process. Right, which is great for, yeah, totally. It's a really good way to. Just like. Yeah, I think it would probably be just. Yeah. And it seems like that is the way he's gonna do it here. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense.
Terminal government is designated as those protein areas.
That might be before. Okay. Yeah.
Microphone on 10:37 a.m. We are now back on the record. Where we had left off was we were about to begin with the opening statements by parties. So let's go ahead and move to opening statements. I understand that a few of the parties do want to make opening statements before their cases in chief, if you will. But we will start with the applicant, Northwestern Energy. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, President Brown, we would.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Shannon Heim. I am General Counsel and Vice President at Northwestern Energy. Northwestern brought this rate review to the Commission to allow us to continue providing safe and reliable service to our customers. A financially healthy utility is integral to that service. After weighing the facts and the evidence, Northwestern is confident that you will find the settlement reached between Northwestern, the Montana Consumer Council, who is the constitutionally appointed consumer advocate in Montana, the Montana Large Customer Group, the federal executive agencies, and Walmart is in the public interest and will result in just and reasonable rates. It is important to note that the settling parties represent the significant customer constituencies served by Northwestern. The settling parties will present live testimony to explain the settlement and demonstrate why the Commission should approve it. In my experience, there's always value in doing an initial level set in an important docket like a rate review. So we all understand the roles we play and what issues are actually before the Commission for decision. I think that's particularly important with so many new people to the process. The job of Northwestern is to present and support its request to the Commission to increase rates, to capture its actual costs and obtain the opportunity to earn a fair rate of return. We have invested over $1 billion in our electric and natural gas systems in Montana since our last rate review, all designed to better serve customers with reliable energy. A rate review is our opportunity to demonstrate the necessity of those costs to you, so our rates capture the investments we've made and the actual costs we incur, so we can fulfill our obligation to provide safe and reliable service for our customers. Our witnesses represent some of the best and brightest from the company. From our Chief Executive Officer, Brian Bird, key members of the management team, and many subject matter experts on a wide variety of issues from tax to cybersecurity to wildfire mitigation. We look forward to offering these witnesses and their evidence for your consideration, even though the substantive issues in the case have narrowed to the scope of the settlement agreement. The job of the interveners is to test the evidence and advocate for their clients' specific viewpoints. Even though Northwestern does not share the luxury of a narrow perspective on some of the issues that will be discussed in this hearing, we appreciate the value the interveners' different outlooks bring to the table. The work done by interveners led Northwestern to make important corrections and concessions in rebuttal. The inherent give and take in the litigated process laid the foundation for the settlement currently before the commission. The commission, of course, has the most important job. According to the commission's What We Do page, your job is to strive to ensure that ratepayers have continued access to utility services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term. The commission will hear all of the evidence, ask clarifying questions, and ultimately judge whether the rates proposed by Northwestern and the settling parties are just and reasonable. The commission's job is to fundamentally balance the critical needs of both the customers of Montana and the utility. I'd like to take just a moment to highlight what is within the scope of this docket and what is not. This is a rate review. We are collectively discussing the financial realities of the costs incurred by Northwestern to serve its customers. The docket is not an indictment or an investigation of climate change. This rate review balances the financial health of the utility, its ability to recover its costs, and earn a fair return with customer needs. The docket does not conduct a prudence review of the Yellowstone County Generating Station. The non-settling parties may raise the recent remand of the Yellowstone County Generating Station air permit to the DEQ as relevant to the docket. However, the settlement's opportunity to seek operation and maintenance costs for Yellowstone do not apply until the plant is providing a benefit to customers. It has to be in service. 5 parties to this case: Northwestern, the Montana Consumer Council, the Montana Large Customer Group, federal executive agencies, and Walmart negotiated a comprehensive settlement of most of the substantive issues in the case. We believe the settlement represents a fair and equitable resolution of the issues that protect both customers who need reliable service and the utility who provides it. No single party got everything they wanted, but through a lively give and take, we arrived at the document we submitted to the commission on April 3rd. The settlement balances reliable, affordable, and sustainable service with the preservation of a financially healthy utility. The commission must decide if the settlement agreement resolving most of the issues in the docket serves the public interest. You will balance the financial health of the utility with the needs of its customers. You will first hear from at least one witness from each settling party. Each witness will provide some live direct testimony and then answer questions related to the settlement. Northwestern's Chief Financial Officer, Crystal Lail, led the negotiation of the settlement for Northwestern and will be the first witness offered to support the settlement. If necessary, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Cindy Fang, will offer testimony on the rate structure in the settlement after the other settling parties' witnesses have testified. Ms. Lail will offer direct testimony detailing how the financial components of the settlement support the health of the utility while protecting customers' ability to receive safe and reliable service. At a time when costs have dramatically risen for all essential goods and services, we appreciate the Commission's consideration to the balanced approach taken by the settlement. Ms. Lail will share that although Northwestern requested a total revenue increase, sticky note. Northwestern requested a base rate increase initially of about $7 a month for the typical customer, which represented 11%. That amount is approximately 6% over today's rate. The settlement, the overall base rate increase as a result of the settlement is approximately 18% or $10.50 a month. On the natural gas side, Northwestern initially requested a base rate increase of approximately $3.53, an 11% base increase. Overall, the base increase is going to go down for natural gas because of the moving gas costs. All of that those figures will be further developed in testimony. We do not take the increases to our residential rates lightly. We are committed to helping our customers manage their bills and make them more aware of all of the programs available to help them pay their bills. The rate increases in this docket are necessary to continue to provide the excellent level of service currently enjoyed by all customers. Northwestern will call its witnesses after the settling parties' witnesses conclude to submit their testimony into the evidentiary record and allow the non-settling parties and the commission the opportunity to ask them questions. Ms. Lael and Ms. Fang will address their pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony at that time. Northwestern would like to acknowledge the significant time and effort invested by the commission and its staff in this docket in preparing and participating in the hearing. We appreciate the work done by all parties today to get to the hearing phase of this docket. We know there will be some ups and downs over the next couple of weeks, and we look forward to working through them in a collegial and professional manner so that all voices are heard and all specific witness needs are accommodated. Again, thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you, counsel. So what I'm going to do is just walk through each of the parties here today to see if you want to do your opening statement now or reserve. Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, I'd prefer to reserve. Thank you.
Or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll make my opening statement now.
Okay, go ahead.
You can find a microphone. Again, Mr. President, commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm here on behalf of the Montana Large Customer Group, just so that you all have some familiarity with that. The LCG is comprised of the following companies. It's Ash Grove Cement Company, Calumet Montana Refining, Enbridge USA, ExxonMobil, GCC, IFG, it's the Idaho Forest Group, Phillips 66, REC Silicon, and the Stillwater Mining Company. We are very pleased today to come before the commission with a settlement which presents a common proposal for the commission's consideration from Northwestern, the Montana Consumer Council, the LCG, Walmart, and the federal executive agencies. We urge the commission to accept the settlement as it will result, as the evidence will show, in rates for Northwestern that are just, reasonable, and in the public interest. In defense of the settlement and in explanation of our pre-filed case, the LCG will be presenting two witnesses in this proceeding, both of whom we expect to be here tomorrow. Mr. Kevin Higgins, who will speak to the overall revenue requirements for the company, as well as then Mr. Justin Bieber, who speaks to revenue allocation and rate design issues. I want to spend a moment, though, to talk about some of the details of the settlement and explain how the evidence will show that the settlement is just, reasonable, and in the public interest. Let's start with the settlement's provisions with regard to the revenue requirement, or the total amount of dollars that customers of Northwestern should pay in the future for their base rates. One of the difficult things that happens in the course of time is customers are asked to pay higher rates for service. It's not anything that any customer likes, but it is a result of the fact that the utility does need to make investments to serve its customers and from time to time is subject to higher costs to provide service to customers. Under Montana law, the utility is then permitted to come to the commission and ask that those cost increases be passed along to customers in rates. From the perspective of the LCG, we analyzed the evidence that was provided by Northwestern and concluded that they had indeed presented a case in support of a rate increase in Montana for both electric and natural gas service. And the settlement is consistent with that finding. Now, having said that, there was some dispute between the parties as to the level of the increase that is appropriate. So we'll start with the electric side of the case. From the electric perspective, and I'll focus here on the base rate increase, setting aside the property tax issues, those have their own little recovery mechanism. On the base rate side, Northwestern filed it for an increase of some $91.7 million across the entire state. When the LCG filed its testimony, it recommended that an increase of $35.4 million be awarded. The settlement was a compromise. The settlement recommends that an increase of $67.3 million be awarded, slightly north of the midpoint between the as-filed positions of Northwestern and the LCG. In reaching that determination, the settlement specifically calls out a couple of critical issues which are necessary to be resolved in between rate cases. Specifically, the settlement specifies a rate of return on equity and capital structure, and it also specifically identifies depreciation rates so that the utility then knows how much it can incur in depreciation expense between now and any future rate case. Those issues have to be resolved, and so they are resolved by the stipulation. However, as noted in the stipulation, there are some issues that are not resolved, but that's because they don't have to be. There were issues raised regarding the methodology and the calculation of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission revenue credit. There were issues involving employee wages and incentives. Those issues are not resolved with specificity, but rather some value of those issues is captured in the settlement in the overall compromise that's being presented by the settling parties. Similarly, on the natural gas side, the revenue requirement that's before you is a compromise. Northwestern's original filed case on the natural gas side was for a $20.2 million rate increase. After the LCG analyzed the case, we recommended a $7.4 million rate increase. The settlement rate increase on base rates again is $14 million, just $200,000 or so from the midpoint of those two as filed positions. And once again, like on the electric side, the settlement resolves those issues that have to be resolved: rate of return, capital structure and depreciation, as well as the issues regarding the acquisition, the financial implications of the acquisition of the Sleepy Hollow system. However, like the electric side, other issues are not resolved, like employee wages and incentives. But those issues are unnecessary for the commission to resolve in this case, are captured in the economics of the compromise, and are issues that will then live on to see another day in some future rate proceeding. Now, against the backdrop, though, of those revenue increases on both the electric and natural gas side, the settlement then turned to the tricky question of how do you allocate those cost increases amongst and between the customer classes. Both Northwestern and the large customer group performed on the electric side what are called cost of service studies to analyze how different customer groups use electricity and how Northwestern's investments and expenses have been made since the past rate case to serve different customer groups. Those cost of service studies attempt to determine, to be fair and to allow each customer class to pay its fair share of the costs, how do you then apportion or allocate any rate increase amongst and between customers? Importantly, while those two different studies are different, and they do have different methodologies that were recommended for the reasons espoused by the witnesses for Northwestern, for the MCC, and for the large customer group, directionally, those two studies were similar in terms of which customer classes should bear a higher percentage of any cost increase and which customer classes should bear a lower proportion of any cost increases. And the settlement, excuse me, relies on that data to make informed judgments and make informed presentations to you about how any rate increase should be allocated between the customers. And I want to talk about that just a little bit here. Residential. In the electric side, the residential cost of service studies presented by Northwestern, supported by the Montana Consumer Council, and the study presented by the large customer group all showed that the residential class current rates are subsidized. That is to say that the residential customers in Montana incur more costs to serve than they pay in rates for service. As such, all of the cost studies suggested that a significant rate increase was appropriate for the residential customers to reflect their cost of service. Importantly, at the settlement revenue requirement, what the evidence will show is that the Northwestern cost of service study suggested that residential customers should pay 21.5% rate increase, or should get a 21.5% rate increase. The LCG study suggested that at the settlement revenue increase, those customers should get a 26% rate increase. The settlement only contemplates an 18.2% increase. meaning if you accept even the Northwestern study, those residential customers after the settlement, if the settlement is approved, will continue to be subsidized by the other customers on the Northwestern system and subsidized to the tune of some $8 million a year. As the settlement, though, looked at the other customers, we observed that the General Service 2 substation group, that class, all of these cost studies suggested that an increase was warranted. The Northwestern study suggested that a 23% increase was warranted. The LCG study suggested a 7% increase was warranted. For purposes of settlement, though, the agreement was to take the GS2 substation class and cap their increase at the same level of increase as the residential class. So that's how those two customers end up at 18%. But the question then remains, how do you collect that $8 million in subsidy for the residential customers? And in order to do that, what you have to do is all of the other customer classes, you have to consider whether they should pay more than their cost of service in order to make up that subsidy. Because at the end of the day, under the law of Montana, the utility is entitled to recover its full revenue requirement from the collection of customers that it serves. What the settlement proposes for your consideration is as follows. The settlement recommended an increase to the irrigation and lighting customers that was consistent with the highest cost of service study result for those customers, which happens to be, the evidence will show, the cost of service study provided by Northwestern. So in essence, those customers, irrigation and lighting, will get a level of increase consistent with what Northwestern study said would be fair for them, meaning for irrigation, a 6.3% increase, and for lighting, a 16.4% increase. But since those classes are getting their cost of service result, we still have to find the $8 million somewhere. And so the agreement was that all of the other customer classes will get a outcome that is worse than all of the cost of service studies say is warranted in order to make up that subsidy. That comes in two places. The GS1 primary and the GS2 transmission classes, both cost studies indicated those two groups would otherwise be entitled to a rate decrease, even in the face of an overall rate increase consistent with the size of the settlement. That's because, relatively speaking, the cost to serve those customers has not risen as much as the cost to serve other customers on the system. However, in order to make up that residential deficit, the agreement was for the GS1 primary and the GS2 transmission customers to not get a rate decrease that the cost studies said was otherwise warranted. And so those customers are held at zero. That makes up a small portion of the deficit, but the issue here is that the GS1 primary and the GS2 transmission customer classes are tiny. Those customer classes collectively only make up about $28 million of annual revenue requirement, which is just slightly more than 10% of the residential class by itself. So you can't make up all that $8 million from just those two classes because they're very small. And so the only thing that we had left to do then was to increase the rates for the GS1 secondary class, the smaller commercial customers, slightly above the cost of service results. And what the evidence will show is for that class, the highest cost of service study result suggested that they should get a 10.6% increase. But for purposes of settlement, we agreed that they should get a 3% higher or 13.6% increase. And that creates then the remaining revenue that is lost because the residential rates are continued to be subsidized under the context of the settlement. But from the perspective of the LCG, we are very pleased that the settlement at least moves constructively in the direction of cost of service and continues to eat away a little bit at the subsidy for the residential customers in a way that is consistent with cost of service. And we support the idea that over time, that is a good public policy objective for the commission so that we continue to get to a point, hopefully in the future, where customers all pay their fair share based on the costs they incur to the system for the electricity that is provided to them. Fortunately, the natural gas story on revenue allocation is much easier. The settlement proposal for the natural gas portion of the case basically adopts the Montana Consumer Council's approach to revenue allocation, which results in all customer classes getting within a few % of the system average increase. So the range of differentials is not nearly as great. That's because the gas side of the system doesn't have the same level of subsidies that the electric side of the system has due to the way that rates have been set historically by the commission. So that's the natural gas. Now, once you get past the revenue requirement and the cost allocation, there are a few other important issues that are addressed in the settlement that we think from the large customer group perspective, the evidence will show are in the public interest. First, as to the Yellowstone County Generating Station, the settlement provides that there will be at this time no rider for the recovery of any of the costs of that proposed facility. Also, importantly, the settlement provides that there will be no costs recovered from customers associated with that facility until three things happen: until it's built, until it is deemed prudent by the commission in a future case, and three, it is put into service. Once those three things happen, then the settlement contemplates that Northwestern is eligible to begin seeking recovery of the cost of Yellowstone. But here's where we get to a critical piece. What Northwestern has requested and what the settlement provides is that they have the right to seek recovery of just variable costs, fuel, variable operation and maintenance expenses. And the settlement provides that Northwestern can ask for those to be started to be recovered once the plant is built, deemed prudent, and put into service. One other point, though, I want to make here. If the commission today approves the settlement, you are not agreeing to charge customers anything. That will be up to a commission in the future based on the future filing by Northwestern. Now, the large customer group has agreed not to oppose that filing, but nothing applies to the commission, any of the other non-settling parties. If you or your successors decide you don't want to charge customers those costs until a future rate case, that issue is reserved for that future commission. There's nothing you're doing here today that locks any cost recovery into stone. To the contrary, all the settlement does is provide a path forward for future commissions to decide these questions. Also, even this special request that is being contemplated where Northwestern can ask a future commission for that variable cost, that does not include the capital costs of the facility. For the capital costs, which are the lion's share of these issues, those capital costs are contemplated to be reflected in the general rate case following that plant coming into service and having been deemed prudent, consistent with ordinary regulatory provisions. Secondly, the agreement contemplates no rate rider for wildfire mitigation costs, although the settlement does provide that the settling parties will agree to allow Northwestern to track those costs for potential recovery by a commission in the future. And last but not least, there is no rider for the or deferred accounting for any of the proposed technology costs or investments. The settlement also eliminates the fixed cost recovery mechanism pilot, so we can move past that, and continues the current method for recovering DSM costs consistent with how rate making works in Montana today. Lastly, I want to make a note as to the settlement and the settlement process in general. A settlement in the context of a public utility case is not like a settlement in civil litigation. In civil litigation, you have two parties, one of whom is bringing a claim and has the power to decide whether that claim should be brought, and the other of whom is defending that claim and has the power to decide how much to pay to avoid that claim moving forward. In this case, Northwestern does not have the power to decide what it charges its customers, And the customers who settled don't have the power to decide what we should pay. That's up to you. The commission is the decision maker. Essentially, all a settlement is an agreement by a collection of parties who have worked hard to come up with a package to present a common proposal for the commission's consideration as a result of the issues in dispute between the parties. But there is nothing in that common proposal that binds the commission. Obviously, you need to exercise your constitutional obligations to assess the evidence and determine what is in the public interest, nor does it in any way limit or bind any of the non-settling parties who have all of the substantive and due process rights they came into this case with to present whatever evidence they want and to encourage the commission to do whatever it is they want as well. Having said all of that, on behalf of the large customer group, and I think I can speak to this from behalf of all the settling parties, we believe that when you look at the evidence and you consider the arguments and the issues, the evidence will demonstrate that the settlement is in the public interest. It will result in rates that are just and reasonable, and will result in a path forward relative to the issues associated with the Yellowstone County Generating Station that makes sense for the utility and for customers in Montana. And for all those reasons, we urge the commission to approve the settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. MEIC, Ms. Harbine. Or whoever.
We'd like to reserve our opening.
All right. HRC. Mr. Rivas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Justice here. President Brown, commissioners. On behalf of Human Resource Council, District 11, Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Northwest Energy Coalition, we appreciate the opportunity to present our case. We will start at the beginning. Northwestern is struggling. Northwestern's initial application sought commission approval for extraordinary regulatory measures, along with a substantial increase in its revenue requirement and the PCAM base. The application also failed to address critical issues related to coal strip, continued a long-standing practice of devaluing energy efficiency, and turned a blind eye to the needs of low and moderate income customers. Because the utility appears unable on its own to confront its challenges while also ensuring customers are not left behind, we proposed a NARUC-inspired stakeholder process to address the issues the utility faces and consider regulatory approaches that would balance the needs of the utility with those of its customers. We see this as the only way for the company, the commission, and stakeholders to truly move forward in creating a utility that meets today's demands and needs. The long and winding road that is the Yellowstone Generating Station is indicative of Northwestern's inability to chart a coherent path. First, Northwestern sought pre-approval, but mid-proceeding, it withdrew its application. Instead, the utility publicly stated it would use the traditional, used and useful, post-build cost recovery method. Shortly thereafter, the utility decided to do something else, which eventually became the expansive reliability rider, where anything related to reliability could be immediately recovered, notwithstanding a lack of prudency, review, or any bookends for cost. Next, when the reliability rider was opposed in intervener testimony, the utility revised the proposal in its rebuttal testimony. And we see now via settlement, Northwestern abandoning the rider, but seeking to recover some Yellowstone costs through PCAM and committing to a prudence review of the plant in the PCAM docket. As we sit today, the commission is placed in the difficult position of weighing the merits of that settlement, a settlement that is being presented on a take or leave basis. The commission should not accept that framing. The commission's job is to act in the public interest, not the interest of the settling parties. Now, Northwestern stated in testimony that the company is under-earning and is at risk of being downgraded by credit agencies due to weak financial metrics. The current regulatory regime, Northwestern says, is incapable of providing for the utility's financial health. We don't disagree that the current regulatory regime needs to be adapted to meet the needs and challenges of what is a rapidly changing energy environment. Northwestern's initial application, however, was not the answer, as demonstrated by the response it received in intervener testimony. Because we are concerned that the company does face very real financial and institutional challenges, and because we are concerned that their decision-making process is not working, we proposed a stakeholder process. Because doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is not a prescription for success. The settlement perpetuates the problem. It does nothing other than providing some amount of additional cash to address the underlying pressures and factors that led to Northwestern's extraordinary proposals that caused the company to file the rate case that it did. At most, the agreement between select interveners kicks the can down the road. Under such a paradigm, we can say with a high degree of confidence, Northwestern will be back before this commission in the not so distant future, asking for additional and substantial relief in order to ensure their financial stability. We note too a certain amount of irony here. The stipulation represents collaboration and compromise among only a select group of interveners, with many representing large customers. Yet our proposal for a stakeholder process was opposed by some parties. It is unfortunate that compromise and collaboration are only for those that are interested in short-term fixes. If the commission likes the spirit of settlements, it should welcome a NARUC design stakeholder process that was created to address the regulatory thicket that utilities find themselves in today. While there are a number of problems with the settlement, we will highlight just three main concerns. First and foremost, the settlement imposes unacceptable and disproportionate rate hikes on residential customers. For a utility that claims to care about its customers, and residential customers make up the vast majority of Northwestern customers, this is highly concerning. The commission must act to protect residential customers, among them many low and moderate income customers who will simply be unable to afford the energy that Northwestern provides and that they need to survive. Second, the settlement fails to address issues related to Colstrip, despite the plant being as large an existential threat to this utility as is the partly constructed Yellowstone plant. There is no provision for the responsible retreatment of decommissioning and remediation costs for Colstrip that will be substantial and will almost assuredly be recovered from Northwestern ratepayers long after the plant has closed. Nor does the settlement, as recommended by witness Levin, require Northwestern to file Colstrip reports with the commission to enable it and stakeholders to stay abreast of the situation at the plant, or to require the development of potential Unit 4 retirement and plant cost recovery scenarios in the utility's integrated resource plan. Third, the testimony of Mr. Botts shows that despite Northwestern repeatedly claiming that resource adequacy issues play an important role in the utility's decision-making, the utility continues to undervalue demand-side management and has ignored demand response and rate design as lower cost options to alleviate pressures related to peak demand. Mr. Botts also highlights that despite proposing significant increases in rates, the utility has offered no solutions to the issues facing low-income customers or the broken system that currently exists for low-income energy assistance, including bill discounts and weatherization. Though the settlement ignores these matters, the commission should not. To conclude, Mr. President, HRC 11, NRDC, and NWEC, parties that have long been involved in matters concerning Northwestern, believe that the proposals put forward by the utility, that neither the initial proposal put forward by the utility, nor the settlement offer a durable solution to the challenges confronting the utility. A settlement that saddles residential customers with a double-digit rate increase while perpetuating Northwestern's underlying problems and doing nothing to address the risk to Northwestern's customers and Montana as a whole is the wrong answer. We believe the commission should strive hard to fashion a better outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas. Broad Reach Power, Mr. Uda.
Mr. President, we'd reserve our opening.
Thank you, Ms. Fish. 350 Montana, Ms. Trinnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, or I guess we're still in the morning, commissioners. Monica Trinnell for 350 Montana. I think it was one of the first sentences that we heard this morning was, this is a hearing of unusual size. That's true, because we're dealing with a rate hike of historic and unprecedented scope. If you look at the last two rate increases that Northwestern asked and received, they were in the $6 to $7 million range. We're looking at something that's a factor of 10 times that size today, something close to $70 million on the electric side alone. That's what the settlement says anyway. We're asking you, as you take the evidence, listen to the witnesses that are here. Why? Why are we here? Why is this commission in the position of having to address this rate hike? Why do you have to make the decision about whether or not this is just and reasonable? Ask the management that you're going to hear testify. Did you do your job over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years? Who did their job and who didn't do their job? Because this is about planning, and that is their job. That is what they are, a monopoly, and they have a guaranteed profit that you've given them that they can earn. Why have they fallen short? Who fell down on the job? And why are they putting you in the position of cleaning up this mess on the backs of your constituents? Please ask those questions. Recently, this commission approved the removal of ring fencing protections for Montanans. Why? Where is our money going? Why did Northwestern spin off its Montana assets? What's happening here? Please ask hard questions about why we're here and why they're asking for a rate increase so significantly larger than anything that they've asked for before. Whose interests are being served and who's harmed? You heard the other parties who are happily settling together say, oh, this is the largest customer constituent group as part of this settlement. And then you heard Mr. Nelson say on this settlement, well, the people who are getting zero, they're just the tiny people. They're just a little people. That's not that much money. But what about all of us? What about the people of Montana? Because the large customers, guess who pays for what they sell? We do. And guess who they get to pay their rate hike onto? Us. So this is not about, when you hear these arguments about, oh, these rate hikes are necessary and we had to have this power for when we're all going to freeze to death in the middle of the winter, or before when it was the hydros, or the Chinese might buy them, so we better hurry up and do it for $1 billion. Why are we here? This is not the greenies of Missoula protesting coal strip and a gas plant. That's not why we're here today asking for a $70 million increase on the electric side alone. It's because this utility, their management, has failed to plan, and the cost for that should be borne by management and the shareholders, not the ratepayers. And you are in a position to make that happen. 350 Montana would ask you to look specifically at three things as we proceed through the course of this hearing. First of all, we want you to ask hard questions about the gas plant itself. It doesn't belong in this docket. Even Mr. Nelson said, oh, don't worry about it. Some other commission somewhere down the road is going to actually have to address the cost of that. Take it out. It doesn't belong here. There's no legal basis for it to be here. It's not built. It's not permitted. It's not in rates. So cross that bridge when you get there. This commission doesn't have to grapple with that. Kick that one right out. Second thing that we want you to do is to look at why this settlement has such a discriminatory impact. What's going on here? And the third thing that we would ask you to pay attention to is the settlement agreement itself is asking for, I think it's 67 million on the electric side. And we will, through cross-examination, show that that should be reduced right off the top by about $3.5 million. So we'll address that through the hearing, through cross-examination. And the last thing that I would ask this commission to do is to please ask the Consumer Council, how are the ratepayers served by this settlement? Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to a good hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Nell. Sure. We have had a request from one of the commissioners not to use flash photography in the room. Please, it's distracting, so thank you for that accommodation. The federal agencies, Captain Duffy.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. As I previously stated, I am Captain Mark Stuffy. I represent federal executive agencies, also known as FEA. We have a unique standing in this proceeding in that we are stewards of the tax dollar. Along with the federal government, our client is Malmstrom Air Force Base. This base has a national defense mission supporting Global Strike Command, which is unique to FEA. Every base commander has more mission than they have money to accomplish their mission. Each year, Congress allocates a finite budget for each base. The same pot of money that pays for the utilities also pays to train and equip our airmen and our guardians to support their mission. Further, those dollars are used to obtain services such as grounds maintenance and janitorial services from local businesses. Every dollar spent on increased utility costs presents a decision to the commander as to what mission requirement, training, or service will receive less while still providing the national defense the U.S. public expects.
Captain, can you move your microphone up closer?
My apologies. You guys hear me now?
Maybe even closer.
I'm pretty sure it's on. Is it? All right.
Okay, there you go. You got it.
My
Thank you,
apologies.
Captain.
All right. Now, every dollar counts in this economic climate. We are here in this case to ensure taxpayers' money allocated to the federal government, along with Malmstrom Air Force Base, does not become burdened by excessive energy costs. Consequently, we want to ensure the rates being paid by Malmstrom Air Force Base and other federal executive agencies are fair, reasonable, and cost-based. FEA has entered into a stipulation and a settlement agreement with Northwest Energy, LCG, Walmart, and MCC that resolves all issues raised by FEA in this case. We believe that this agreement is just and reasonable. This is based on a modest revenue increase for Northwestern Energy, a rate of return on equity for electric of 9.65, a revenue allocation across customer classes that is fair and equitable. Now, FEA witness Greg Meyer will be able to explore these in more details if the commissioners and staff have any questions. At the end of the day, the settlement agreement avoids excessive utility costs and keeps the tax dollars focused on protecting this nation while also supporting local businesses, allowing Northwest Energy to earn a reasonable profit. Consequently, we feel the adjustments contained within this stipulation and settlement are reasonable and strike a fair balance for both the utility and its customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. All right. Walmart, Mr. Oram. It's difficult for me to see you, Mr. Oram. Sorry. Go ahead.
Could go up there if you need me to, but thank you.
Make sure you pull that microphone right up to your.
All right. Maybe I should hold it like I'm famous or something. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Walmart filed the direct testimony and exhibits of Andrew D. Teague on behalf of Walmart, Inc., December 19th, 2022. Mr. Teague testified as follows. Walmart is a large customer of Northwest Energy. Walmart has 14 stores and related facilities that take electric and natural gas service from Northwestern in Montana. Walmart primarily receives electric service under General Service 1 Secondary Demand, GS1. Walmart primarily receives natural gas service under General Natural Gas Service, GSG. Mr. Teague made recommendations to the commission relating to cost allocation, rate design, and Northwest Energy's proposed rider mechanisms. Walmart also filed the direct testimony and exhibits of Alex J. Cronauer on behalf of Walmart, Inc. on December 19, 2022. Mr. Cronauer made recommendations to the commission regarding return on equity. Walmart entered into a stipulation and settlement agreement with Northwest Energy, the Montana Consumer Council, Montana Large Customer Group, and the federal executive agencies, which was timely filed on April 3rd, 2023. The stipulation is a result of voluntary negotiations and reflects give and take. The stipulation resolves all issues raised by the stipulating parties regarding revenue requirements, cost allocation, rate design, and proposed rider mechanisms. The stipulation establishes just and reasonable rates for all rate classes. The stipulation is a just and reasonable resolution for Northwest Energy, its customers, including Walmart and other stakeholders. The stipulation is in the best interest, is consistent with Montana law and policy, and promotes administrative efficiency. Walmart supports the reasonableness of the stipulation and will call Andrew Teague and Alex Cronauer in support of it. I'd like to mention at the end that Walmart receives the largest rate increase based on this stipulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Worm. Last but not least, Renewable Northwest, Ms. Hornbein.
Mr. President, members of the commission, Renewable Northwest will reserve its opening statement.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Hornbein. All right. Thank you, council. Your excellent opening statements. All right. Are you ready to move forward? All right. We will begin by allowing stipulating parties to each present a witness to sponsor the stipulation and proposed settlement agreement and allow for cross-examination of those witnesses before proceeding to each party's case in chief. Ms. Norcott, you may proceed by calling Northwestern Energy's witness in support of the settlement agreement.
Well, you get me for this one, Mr. President.
All right, hold on, please. So for those of you that have not regularly practiced before the Public Service Commission, we do the swearing in process a little bit different than you would in your regular court of law. What we try to do is do swearing in mass, if you will, saves time. So for those of you that will likely be called as a witness, what I would like you to do at this point in time is to stand up and to raise your right hand. All right, is there anybody in the overflow room? May I be party to this? Okay, seeing none. For those of you that have stood, do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
We do.
Okay, counsel, if any of your witnesses are not present today, please notify me at the time your witnesses are called to testify so that I may swear them in at that point in time. They can provide testimony then. All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Northwestern calls Crystal Lale to the stand.
Good morning, Ms. Lale.
How about that? Good morning.
Wait, sorry, my microphone has feedback. That work? Okay, is that better? Oh, that's good. Thank you. Ms. Lale, will you please state your name and spell your last and provide your business address for the record?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, President, Commissioners, and those here. My name is Crystal Lail, L-A-I-L. My business address is 3010 West 69th Street, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 57108.
By whom are you employed?
I am employed by Northwestern Energy.
And your title?
Vice President and Chief Financial Officer.
Did Northwestern negotiate with other parties in this docket to reach a settlement?
We did. You've heard from a variety of parties this morning that signed on to the settlement agreement, including the Montana Consumer Council, Large Customer Group, the federal executive agencies, and Walmart.
Thank you. Ms. Lale, I believe in front of you is a document marked for identification purposes as Exhibit Joint 1. Do you have that in front of you?
I have that in front of me.
And can you please tell the commission what that document is?
The document I have in front of me is the stipulation and settlement agreement amongst the multi-parties that settled and filed with the commission.
Yeah, at this time, Northwestern would move joint exhibit or exhibit joint one.
All right, we have Exhibit Joint 1 before us. Is there objection to the admission of this document?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, no objection, but I would like to inquire of council whether or not this exhibit includes the work papers that were sent by email yesterday in connection with the settlement.
The document includes the exhibits that were filed with the commission. It does not include the work papers as it normally would. Work papers were provided to parties as formal discovery.
You want to address that?
I'll be making a motion to include those work papers into evidence, but when it comes to cross-examination of Ms. Whale.
All right, very good. Mr. Nell, did you have an objection? Seeing no objection. Is it Exhibit JT1 or Joint 1 is admitted?
Thank you. Ms. Lael, how are Northwestern's customers represented in the settlement?
Northwestern's customers are represented by a variety of interveners in this case, many of you, what you've heard from this morning. Importantly, residential customers and the broad set of customers referred to under that bucket are represented by the Montana Consumer Council in this case. You've heard from the large customer group and specifically the customers that they represent. I would mention, in addition to residential, you have your broader set of business customers that are also represented by the Consumer Council. And then you have the federal executive agencies and Walmart and their roles as well.
I would remind you gently to slow down for the court.
I have been reminded of that before. I will do my best.
Ms. Lael, would you characterize the settlement as a black box?
I would not characterize the settlement as a black box. Black box settlements in the industry are typically settlements where you will see revenue only defined and no greater details. Those do occur. This one is not that. You heard from Mr. Nelson referring to a bit of the details of the settlement, and I'll walk through those. But importantly, this settlement, in addition to detailing the revenue that was agreed upon by the parties, also contains specific elements, including rate of return, ROE, the capital structure, and then the other adjustments that were agreed upon and represent compromise amongst the parties to get to the revenue number. And therefore, this is not a black box settlement as that term is typically used.
Settlement affect Northwestern's financial health and address its concerns about regulatory lag.
Again, you've heard from a few folks this morning on our financial health and regulatory lag, and it's an important foundation to this case and why we needed to come in to address the rates that we charge customers. This provides progress, but does not indeed resolve all of the issues related to regulatory lag and the regulatory construct, and we expect to continue to work on those in the future.
Can you please explain why Northwestern settled for a lower ROE than it sought in its application?
Sure. Again, you've heard from a lot of our customers this morning and folks who feel strongly about this. And ROE is when you look at macroeconomic indicators that we're all following, think about interest rates, think about risk on return, all of those factors would push up ROE. However, the settlement is indeed a compromise. And when you consider the balance of customer impact, and that's all customers, business, residential, et cetera, one of the significant areas of compromise in this settlement is indeed the ROE allowed. And I think you know this, but maintained from where our prior ROEs were in prior cases.
So just to clarify, Northwestern's ROE for electric and natural gas are staying the same.
Yes, they are.
Why did Northwestern settle for a lower revenue requirement than it sought in its application and rebuttal testimony?
Again, and as we walk through the settlement, we'll talk about the individual elements of how we got there. But indeed, we put forth a case, and part of the interveners put forth detailed testimony as to how you determine what should be included in rates. What is your cost to provide service to customers? What are the assets that you're using, the return on that? So why do we settle for something less than that? It always represents a compromise amongst the parties. We put forth our case, which we believe is solidly supported. The interveners put forth their case as to how that revenue requirement should be determined. And then we come to the table and discuss those specific details and have put forth before you a compromise with that regard.
Okay, let's discuss the contents of the stipulation. Can you please turn to settlement, or I'm sorry, section A of Exhibit Joint 1 and describe it to the commission?
Sure, and I'm on page 2 of the settlement and stipulation agreement. Section A is what I would refer to as the foundation to why we're here today, which is determining a revenue requirement that should be used then ultimately to design rates to customers. Paragraphs 1 and 2 give you the specific revenue amounts that were agreed upon by the settling parties. Those revenue amounts are split between base rates and tax rates. So paragraph 1 is the electric section and paragraph 2 is the natural gas section. Those paragraphs importantly are supported by exhibits A for electric and exhibit B for natural gas that contain the detail of our case as filed, adjusted for rebuttal of the revenue need, and then shows how those amounts were adjusted to ultimately the amounts that are summarized here in paragraphs 1 and 2. Importantly, in determining those revenue amounts, as we talked about, there's probably thousands of pages back there that support our testimony, but ultimately there's a couple of significant things that we reached compromise on. Paragraph 3 addresses specifically ROE and capital structure. Those are foundational elements to attracting capital. That is how we finance the business and invest in infrastructure in the state and deliver service. We attract an amount of debt capital and equity capital to do so. So paragraph 3 specifically addresses both the balance of those two things and how we go about financing the business to provide safe and reliable service to customers, and the return component related to those. So the only place we make money is a return on our assets, and that ROE that is stated in paragraph 3 specifically spells out what that is. And as we've already discussed today, a significant component of compromise amongst the parties was maintaining those ROE rates from prior cases. There's no change from what is currently in rates today as to that ROE component. And that was, again, a significant part in considering the balance of customer impact. Paragraph 4 addresses the technicalities of depreciation. Another significant component or area of compromise and how we close that gap between the settling parties' revenue cases and our case. Depreciation in its simplest form is the time period over which we recover the assets that are serving customers. Witnesses or a witness for MCC and LCG combined, witness Garrett, had proposed some adjustments to depreciation for electric T&D assets and gas T&D assets. Paragraph 4 in that compromise reflects us accepting the settling parties' case there related to depreciation, which resulted in a $7.1 million reduction to revenue between electric and gas. It provides the details of that, which of course is in pre-filed testimony in this case. And then paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 contain additional details that relates to determining revenue requirement and areas that we felt it was important to, of course, we're not addressing every aspect of this case, but important to spell out in the settlement agreement. In paragraph 5, you'll see that the settling parties accepted our positions as it relates to tax. In paragraph 6, you'll see a significant conversation and lots of testimony filed on this related to how the transmission credits work, where we accepted a proposal from the settling parties as to information that will be provided in our next rate review. And then in paragraph 7, we're specifically addressing the Sleepy Hollow assets and the agreement here to accept Northwestern's position as modified in our rebuttal testimony. So overall, I would summarize section A as your roadmap to how we got to our revenue numbers and providing the details that support that with exhibits A and B.
Okay, let's turn to section B, which is the revenue allocation and rate design. Can you give the commission a high-level overview of this section?
Sure. Section B is after we review all the data, pre-filed testimony, how you work up a revenue requirement, then you have to allocate that revenue to customers. You heard a fair amount from Mr. Nelson in his opening as to how that allocation works based off class cost of service. And there are witnesses here today that will support the data that was used in the compromise of section B.
Okay, can you please walk through section C and maybe touch on the role property taxes play in rates?
Is unique, and I heard comments this morning as to our rates compared to others, and a significant piece of that is being a tax collector for the state. I think on the electric side, that's about $17 a month in our bills that we collect. The way we have a mechanism, the property tax tracker, that outside of rate cases provides for some adjustment, but not full recovery of those increases. In a rate case, that mechanism is adjusted. And so paragraph C is addressing that and noting the amount of increase related to the collection of tax through our rates and spelling out those amounts.
All right, let's turn to section D. Can you please discuss this section with the commission?
Another element that is captured or triggered by a rate case and for adjustment is the amount that is collected through our bill for the power costs and credits adjustment mechanism. Similar to property taxes, we earn no dollars on that. In fact, take a haircut between rate cases. So the power cost and credits adjustment mechanism here is meant to update the base. You will see paragraph 13 reflects the agreement amongst the parties for that. And then additionally, we had proposed certain policy changes to that mechanism. This compromise agreement reflects a couple of changes. One is that the deferred balance, which is currently only where we either over or under collect, and we have been under collecting the past few years, that under collection only is flowed through to customers on the electric side once a year versus on the natural gas side, comparatively, that rate adjusts monthly. With this, we've agreed to a quarterly adjustment of that deferred balance to begin flowing through, and again, subject to true up and ultimately the annual PCAM filing and review there. And then the application of an interest component to that. For instance, last year, I think our deferred balance was $48 million that Northwestern was carrying on its balance sheet, already paid out for that supply, not collected from customers. So there will now be an interest component applied to that balance going forward. But notably, that works both ways. If we were in the position to be over collected, customers would receive interest on that balance.
Can you share with the commission at a high level how that interest will be calculated?
The detail of that, it's a market interest rate. The detail is in Ms. Fang's testimony, and interest otherwise in a lot of cases is tied to ROR. In this instance, we felt like a reasonable in between was a market interest rate that moves based off actual interest rate movements.
Okay, let's turn to section E. Can you give a high level overview of this section before we talk about the specific expense provisions?
Sure. Section E has, I think, a lot of what interveners are most interested in here today, but we had made multiple policy proposals in this case to talk about how we move forward from a regulatory construct. Those included rider type mechanisms that are used in lots of jurisdictions, but we focused on critically where we believe we have the most operational risk, which is around reliability, fire, and cyber. In addition to that, we had proposed certain changes to the pilot that was put in place with our last electric rate review related to decoupling, and then also certain changes with relation to demand side management. This section addresses each of these in turn.
Let's turn to paragraph 15, which was I understand is the compromise reached on the reliability rider. Can you take the commission through what was agreed?
Our initial proposal was a broad reliability rider meant to support and allow for the critical investment that needs to occur in Montana. We all talk a lot and think a lot about how we keep the lights on and the gas flowing. So the reliability rider was that proposal, and a compromise with the parties and significant, again, give and take between all of us. We narrowed the scope of that to just relate to the Yellowstone facility. And in addition to narrowing it to just the Yellowstone facility, so not the other assets that may have been included in the reliability rider in the future, only that facility. Then an additional narrowing is there is no capital for that facility included in what is laid out in paragraph 15 here. So I think there's been a bit of confusion maybe We attempted to make the wording very clear, but there is no capital component in here. Obviously, that's something we would have wanted, but again, represents compromise amongst the parties. And what this provides is a mechanism that is familiar to the commission and interveners in the PCAM and the property taxes, a path for Northwestern to come in and make a filing and request recovery of the operating costs for that facility. So again, no capital, just operating. And the key piece to that is we may make that filing, but that filing will be put forth in front of this commission. And at the same time, customers will be receiving the benefit of that facility. And the request is that there's an update to the PCAM base to reflect certain market costs that that facility may replace. So that's why the PCAM is the appropriate mechanism to bring forth the operating costs as it relates to Yellowstone, and also for the commission at that time to examine prudence of that facility. So we've attempted to lay that out in a mechanism that, again, no cost for Yellowstone are in this case, but provides for once that asset is in service, and we've talked about regulatory lag and the implications of that for us to be a financially healthy utility, to put a facility like that into service, serving customers essentially for free until we can get through a historical rate-making construct when the operating costs that we begin to incur are material. Finding a path forward, this represents that compromise. And that compromise is laid out again through the PCAM vehicle, because that's the market cost that that facility will be replacing. And again, importantly, only once that asset is constructed in service, serving customers. And then the filing contemplates multiple aspects, but importantly, bringing forth a prudence review on top of a PCAM base reset.
Can you walk through the different buckets of expenses that are identified in paragraph 15?
Sure. Paragraph 15, in an attempt to be very specific, we got into FERC accounts here to make sure, one, the settling parties, we all knew what we were asking, but these all come back to an exhibit that's on file in the pre-filed direct of this testimony of ADD 17 that lays out the operating costs that we expect to incur once that facility is in place. So think about the gas fuel costs that will supply that facility. Think there's other things that go with that, ammonia, et cetera. There's the folks that will be employed there operating the facility. So we literally took the time to lay out the specific FERC accounts that we're contemplating that include the operating costs of that facility, again, once in service.
Is it your understanding that this is a long-term solution to recover the costs for Yellowstone?
No, this is a bridge to reduce regulatory lag. We've talked about that a lot. All riders in any mechanism that provides for timely cost recovery are, until the time at which we file our next rate review. And then the full cost of that facility, and importantly, the capital piece would come in that rate review, but allow some bridge of recovering operating costs, again, once it's serving customers.
Okay, let's move on to paragraph 16, which is the wildfire mitigation rider compromise. Can you discuss that with the commission, please?
Certainly, and I started this section with saying there was very significant operational risks that we felt like from a policy perspective and regulatory construct should be before the interveners in this case and the commission to consider. And we've had a fire plan for a long time. We brought forth an enhanced fire mitigation plan. I think we all understand the risk to Montana related to fire, and how we go about that as an electric utility is something we wanted to have a conversation with interveners in the commission about. For that ongoing plan. The plan was separated into operating components, operating expenses to do the work, and capital components. What this allows for is the deferral of the operating portion of that plan for us to come in and ask for recovery in a future rate review filing.
Can you estimate for the commission what kind of dollars are attached to that?
I think my counsel is leading the witness to point out that Exhibit E contains the specific dollar amounts that we had proposed in our enhanced fire mitigation plan. And those dollars were detailed out, lots of testimony on this, and we have great folks who do this work that you can hear from. But Exhibit E gives you the specific dollar amounts and how we expect to ramp up that plan. You will see the amounts are uneven over time. And then importantly, that those dollars are incremental to the dollars that are in the base case for this or in the base of this case.
Ms. Lael, the deferred accounting agreed upon in paragraph 16, does that support Northwestern's timely cost recovery?
No, it does not. This is again an element of compromise. While it provides what I would refer to as earnings support, it is not cash supportive. So again, what we agreed to on if I revert back to the Yellowstone facility and the reliability rider is something that's cash supportive, and a compromise on this is that it would be earnings supportive, but not cash supportive in the interim. When you defer costs and you don't receive that in rates, obviously the cash collection, we'd put out the dollars up front and not be able to recover those until a future rate proceeding.
Is there anything else in section E that you want to highlight for the commission?
The only thing I would highlight, again, paragraphs 17, 18, 19 reflect compromise positions amongst the party. We agreed to forgo the business technology rider. Again, we can all talk about cyber and the impacts on what we do and the significance of those, but a compromise is we agreed to forgo that rider in this case. Also, the fixed cost recovery mechanism, or I would nomenclature call that a decoupling pilot, was highly contentious, and we had proposed a full revenue neutral approach. We all agreed to disagree and walk away from that one. So that pilot ends, and then DSM, there was a proposal to change how that works. And we've agreed to leave DSM through the PCAM for recovery.
Okay, section F really is kind of the legal stuff. So I would propose, let's turn to exhibit A. And if you can explain to the commission what they're seeing in exhibit A and B.
Again, exhibit A and B, I would refer to them in parallel because they present the details of the revenue agreed to in this case between the electric filing and the natural gas filing. And the importance of these exhibits, and I think I mentioned this in the section A being foundational to what we're here to talk about, which is what is the cost of providing service? What are the assets in service? And ultimately that gets you revenue. This details that out. So you'll see the top section of this page details the test year revenues as filed by Northwestern. And so that's essentially our rebuttal case. And you can see we collect revenues from a couple of buckets, including transmission customers, that sort of thing. It details out that. And then the middle section of this shows the adjustments that we agreed upon with the settling parties to get to the revenue increase that we've talked about here today. And so you see specifically the math around the reduction of ROE, again, back to the same ROE that is in rates today. The adjustment related to the time with which we recover assets, so the depreciation accrual, and then the unspecified reduction, as Mr. Nelson noted in his opening statements, those who filed testimony on detailed revenue requirement, there was a whole host of other issues that we all had positions on that we felt strongly about. And the amounts here reflected a compromise position amongst all of us for some economic reduction related to those positions, resulting to the stipulated revenue increase that is laid out here. And then you see the same rendering of the top section, which was, this was our rebuttal case based off what we filed. You adjust it for the revenues, the amounts we all agreed upon as settling parties, and then you get the stipulated revenue requirement in the bottom section.
Great. Can you just identify for the commission exhibits C and D?
Exhibits C and D are the match to the section, I believe it's section B of the agreement that talks about how those revenues that I just mentioned are allocated. So it's the allocated cost of service and rate design exhibits that contain the details of how the rates are then determined for each class of customers.
Okay, and then exhibit E, we talked about a little bit, but is there anything else about exhibit E that you want to highlight?
The thing I would just note with exhibit E, and again, in the sense of a transparent settlement and us all making sure that a couple of years from now, when we discuss this again, we all knew what we were agreeing to. We included the specific amounts related to the enhanced fire mitigation program for operating costs. We pulled this from detail that's already captured in the pre-filed testimony, but wanting to make sure that the settlement is clear as to what we're all agreeing with.
Is there a guarantee that Northwestern will spend the amount of money identified in Exhibit E on fire mitigation?
No, we may spend more, we may spend less, but this was the proposal as laid out in our enhanced fire mitigation program and a reasonable estimate of what we think accelerating some of that program would cost.
I don't know how long you want to go before, lunch, but this might be a good breaking time. We have some discussion about bill impacts that will probably take a while. So I would maybe suggest.
I'll take that under advisement. Just a question for you. Do you intend to call Ms. Fang as a supporting witness for the?
If necessary, I don't think we'll need to. I think the other joint settling parties will talk about the rate design and the rate issues so she won't need to be called. But if there's a need after the other settling witnesses testify.
Council, I'm just going to let you know that I have a number of questions about the settlement document. And so I would put Ms. Fang perhaps on standby if Ms. Lael is not able to answer those questions. Ms. Fang. All right. Well, I think the suggestion to break now for lunch is a good one. Thank you to everybody, council, those who testified this morning, witnesses for a very orderly presentation this morning. It's very much appreciated by the commission. Time is now 11:56 a.m. Why don't we reconvene at 1 p.m. sharp, and we will pick up here. Again, time is now 11:56 a.m. We will go off the record.